Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Don's sitting in the host chair today. I think I've told that story before, Chris, but maybe we have some new listeners. One of the first podcasts that Alexis and I shared, by the way, Chris Coppola is joining me today. So, Chris,
No,
inevitably, I have
let's not do it. Let's not do it for this one.
Fair
Let's
enough.
do the
Fair
one
enough.
episode name. Let's not even.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, what I was about to say there is that whole thing of sitting in the host chair today started back in the day when one of the podcasts that Alexis and I first came to both enjoy and share is Stuff You Should Know. I don't know if you ever heard Stuff You Should Know with Chuck and Josh, but it's one of my favorite podcasts. And one of the things I've loved about it, I've talked about this before, tried to model what we do here on A Fork in Time in the Room Where It Happened is very conversational. Their podcast is like you're sitting on two guys talking and you're part of the conversation. It's fun. But occasionally they would do this thing where they would talk about going back in the Wayback Machine, and they sometimes would add a sound effect to that. And so that's where sort of the origin of this idea was, who's sitting in the host chair like we're in the time machine, in the Fork in Time, go back machine. So that's why we use that sitting in the host chair thing today. That just sort of grew out of some of the early episodes for those that have gone back and listened to our back category. But what we're going to do today is something a little bit different. I guess we could do an alternate history flair to this if we imagine this event never happened, but I don't want to think about this event never happening. So we'll just pass on that. But I realized that when Dylan Holzheimer, who's the most recent addition to our team here, joined the team, I did a little episode where I sort of introduced Dylan, and we did a little Q&A with him, sort of to get him to know, introduce him to our listeners. He'd been on as a guest. And I was just sharing with Chris off podcast, a term that we often use here, off air, if you will, a lot. We have a tracking spreadsheet for all episodes, and one of the things we actually track is the percentage of appearances of each member of the team and or guests on a podcast. And Chris, you've just hit a notable threshold as a member of the team. We were just talking about this. You have now been on slightly more than 30% of the episodes all time of A Fork in Time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you consider that I did not know you until episode 45 of A Fork in Time, and this is episode one, let me scroll down here to make sure I get this right. This is going to be episode 187. I thought that was the case, but I wanted to be sure. That's saying something. In fact, we were just talking about the fact that because, Alexis has gotten married and now she's become a mom and she just doesn't have as much time for this. You haven't quite caught her yet, but you're right up on the heels of the co-founder of this podcast in terms of percentage here. So any thoughts just on that?
It's all part of my master plan.
The same thing we do every night, Pinky, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But one of the things I've said on air a lot, I'll say it again here. It's one of the things I've enjoyed about this process and having the podcast. When we started it, I had no idea what it would be, and I guess it is what I thought it would be, and it's not what I thought it would be, both at the same time, if that makes any sense. But I didn't know I'd meet people along the way that would then become part of the team and are now an integral part of what we do. I was looking back. It's been a really long time. One of the things about that statistical thing that's there is, in the mix of 186 episodes, there are a total of 14 plus 53. So, I just tried to do math in my head. That's a dangerous thing. So that is 68. 68. Okay. No, you're right. 67. Okay. Thank you, Chris. 67 of the 186 were solo episodes. Because that used to be the case when there was only Alexis and I, and we both couldn't get together. We would do a solo episode. It's been a long time since we've done a solo episode, which our listeners are probably saying, thank you, Don. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you very much. But all of that being said is that you become a part of the team. Our two Erics have become a part of the team. Robert's become a part of the team. We brought through a series of guests. We've had some recurring guests. We mentioned him last week, Brett Frost, who was on several episodes. We've had others as well. And this has been the fun journey for me. And I hope that our listeners who have stuck with us all the way through realize that that's part of the fun. All of that being said, Don loves to go around the block and come back to the front door. That's what he does really, really well. I did that little introductory thing for Dylan. Chris, we've never done it for you because you've been here for the duration, even as we've been adding other folks. So I thought that would be a fun little exercise for us and hopefully for our listeners today is let's get to know Chris a little bit better in terms of just focusing on that instead of a topic. So Chris, you have probably the most famous tagline on A Fork in Time, I think, so far. I think
That
I would
might
rank
be.
that up there number one.
That
Other
might
than
be.
how we close most of the shows, which is come on a fork,
Mhm.
take it. So Chris, now would be the appropriate time for me to let you do something, and what would that be?
Say hi to the good people.
Saying hi to the good people. I think I don't even know when we stumbled into that the first time. I think I just said, Chris, say hi to the good people, and just became something we did every time.
And you did not expect me to just take it the Milton Berle way, and I
Exactly.
did.
Which is good.
Yeah.
So one of the things I thought we would do today, we don't have to go deep, but one of the things I would like to even know more about, even though we spent a lot of time recording episodes, and I think I know this from a lot of the conversations we've had off podcast, is why is Chris Coppola a history guy? How did that happen? And a little bit about, your favorite areas of history and why they're your favorites. Just again, I'm just going to shut up now and let you monologue a little bit about, sort of how we got to the journey to where we are today, and then how Chris got to where he is in terms of how he thinks about history today.
So I'm going to throw it back a little bit, Don. You can see what is right above my head right now. I intentionally moved the camera to show that's why you saw just my eyes at one point. And this is behind me is a family heirloom. It's the front page of the Honolulu Star Telegram from December 7th, 1941. And when you threw this idea at me, I had to put that up. It was lucky that I recently rearranged my desk so that that's right there and easily accessible. I think what got me interested and started is almost, I'm going to call it a Forrest Gump effect. I have very, strong memories of, I have this because my grandfather was there. My father was on a fighter base during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and one of my first memories was him not going directly into his room to change out of his work clothes the night the Berlin Wall came down. So history to me feels a lot like myself and my family popping up in these events, maybe not, having any role in them whatsoever, but a tie to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a thread that connects your personal history to the broader history that the rest of us know in a way that's unique to you, like it is unique to many of us for whatever reasons they are.
Yeah, and I don't really think it's unique to me, except that I make that connection, and it's a doorway into that bigger event.
Right. Again, I don't think any of us are unique in terms of how we interact with history, but each of our connections to those history things are unique because we're unique individuals. Our families are unique individuals, et cetera, et cetera. And I get that. And your touchstone events like that are going to be different than mine, but it'll be interesting ways that we will find that when you talk to people, there are interesting overlaps that are there. I think most of our listeners know I'm a big sports fan, particularly a big baseball fan. And I've occasionally over the years had conversations with folks about having grown up in Houston. I've been to a lot of Astros games in my life, both growing up, but also some things that I did as an adult that actually had me being paid to be at the ballpark, which was a pretty good little gig. So I've seen a lot of baseball, and I've seen a lot of good baseball. I've seen a lot of bad baseball too in the last 20 years. But I'm amazed where I'm going there with that is I'll talk to somebody about, we talk about, oh, I was there at that game. Well, I was too. Before we even knew each other, had no connection. And then that gives us this point that we share because we have a common love in this case for a game or for a team. But then, we start talking about that event. We have our different recollections of it or whatever the case might be. So I completely get that. And again, it's a pretty cool thing to see Wahoo bombed by Japanese planes. And you said that's the Honolulu newspaper, correct?
Right. Honolulu Star Telegram.
Yeah. So that's a pretty cool thing. And I'm guessing if that whole thing, if there was a fire suddenly, God forbid, at your house and you were grabbing things to go with that's on the short list of things to grab, right?
Yes, it absolutely is. 100%.
Yeah. So I totally get that. So that gives us a little insight into why Chris likes history. Um, what first brought you to A Fork in Time? Let me start with that because again, it started out with you giving an episode suggestion, us connecting, and then you joining for episode 45. There'll be a link in the show notes to that. That's No Cigar, which is the first episode that Chris and I did together. That they're Chris being a guest before he was part of the team. How did you find A Fork in Time?
I searched. I think I just found it interesting, the idea of alternative history, and I happened to, I don't even remember why, but I one day I happened to throw it into my podcast machine, and you guys came up, and I started listening.
Do you remember the first episode you heard by any chance? Now I'm just curious, or even the topic was. You may not know the title, but do you remember what the topic was?
No idea if I'm
Okay.
being
No, that's fine.
yeah,
I want you to be honest.
I think one of the things was because I came late, there was a backlog. So it probably wasn't the first episode. I probably tried one and then went back and then went forward. And
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So the first suggestion that you brought to me, I think speaks to when I think of history, maybe just because of the episodes we've done. Again, I mentioned this, I think, on the last episode that we did. I think of you. It happened to be, guess what? 19th century European history. Is that a fair thing to say? That is one of your favorite periods of history, Chris? Is that a fair thing to say?
I real I think it's become there. It's not where I started out.
Okay.
I started out hating sharks, and I'll get back to that in a second.
Okay.
I distinctly remember being, as a little kid, A&E and the Discovery Channel showed old black and white documentaries, showed World War II. And because of this, and because that event is literally how half my family got here, there was a really strong connection there. It was also, let's face it, that is a visually remembered conflict. Like, it's very easy to access that. Now, the hating of sharks was every August, the Discovery Channel does their big Shark Week, and they kick off all the documentaries I wanted to watch for some idiots swimming with a fish. It made no sense to me.
And again, the running joke I have with a lot of people is I remember when the History Channel used to be history. It wasn't Ancient Aliens and Pawn Stars and Gold Diggers and whatever it is now. I remember when it was actually history documentaries
in the 5th grade, my parents got me the History Channel. It used to be one of those premium channels, and that's what I got as a gift.
Yeah. So you were sort of drawn to history because of, so really sort of the family and military history, I guess, being one of the entree points, as you just mentioned there.
It was, but then it just, the reason I got to the 19th century is it spread out from there.
Right.
Because, well, just following things back, and that was just a natural chain.
Yeah, I was thinking about something actually. It's amazing now. The algorithms follow us to a great degree now, right? And so because I do the things that I do related to the podcast, some of my Google searches, are on esoteric topics because they're historical topics, or because of the YouTube channel, which we put the podcast on as a YouTube channel. Those types of things. My YouTube algorithm gets tweaked a great degree by that. When I'm doing background stuff, I'll end up watching, a documentary on YouTube. I'm amazed, by the way, the quality of some of the documentaries that exist on YouTube now, that before had to come through a History Channel, right? Now there's another way to do that. You have to vet whether you're getting good data. That's the tricky part about, being out in the broad universe. But but just what's there. But, one of the things that really struck me just recently as I was going through an exercise of seeing the stuff that was being served up there was just how much of my interest in history sort of came from what you just described too, Chris, which was originally from kind of this accessing it through military history. But then you want to know the rest of it, and then you want to keep going back and back and back and back. And before you know it, and then you're actually doing history in school in a different way, you start connecting all the dots. And you've heard me say this a number of times on the show. I don't think of myself as being really very good as a historical person who's interested in history. There's a few exceptions to this. I think World War II is one of the exceptions to this. But I don't think of myself as being very good or being very deep in a lot of history, but I have a real good sense of the general flow of history, the big sweep of history. And that's what I get fascinated about. And then, of course, that led me back into the idea of alternate history. So do you have a particular history teacher that really sticks out in your head, Chris?
Hands
that
down.
Hands down. Who would that be? Tell me about that person.
Bob Cole.
Okay.
I still can't. I still have trouble calling him anything other than Mr. Cole. He was a Hawaiian native who grew up in Southern California, and it just so happened that his son was my age. And so at the neighborhood pool, he was the enforcer of the boys' room. Very much because he's a public school teacher. So right. He could be there in the summer. And, a lot of the other adults there were mothers who would bring their kids there, and we'd all be playing. And Bob Cole, I don't know that he was 6'3", but he certainly in my mind seemed that size. Picture Don Ho.
Okay.
That's Mr. Cole. But if there was trouble, he would come in there and be physically like bringing people out as necessary. He and this is another great kind of Forrest Gump moment. Was a corpsman in Hue. I can't talk about him without like pulling a moment of tie of his history. He in elementary school, I would go over and play football with his son Matt, and then come in and borrow history textbooks from him. He was one of the people that kind of helped open it up for me, just kind of accelerate everything beyond like what felt like almost the plodding pace of school. He's like, you know what? Here it is. Just hit the gas and go and find.
Yeah, I have a couple of history teachers that are that way for me. Mine happens to be my 11th grade American history teacher. Ray Balch is his name. That would be F. Raymond Balch. That for those that know me, that's a little bit of an inside joke here about there. But one of the things that I did in high school was I participated in a program. I actually got pulled into this by several of my older friends that I grew up in the same neighborhood with or had gone to school with, or there were older siblings, people that were in my same age. But I ended up participating in high school and then in college in a Model United Nations program. And so the Houston area Model United Nations was that program. And Mr. Balch was the sponsor for that program. He's also the sponsor for the Key Club. So there were two organizations at the high school that I went to that if you were involved in, you got to know Mr. Balch. One of them was Key Club, which we were, for those of us, a lot of us that were in honors and advanced classes and were looking to go to college, wanted to have good stuff on our college resumes, and Key Club and sort of the service aspect of that was a good thing, and just a good thing in general. But then also because of Model United Nations, I got to know him as a freshman, even though he taught junior level American history. So he was also a graduate of where I eventually went to college, so the University of Houston. So we had that to share a little bit. But mainly through Model UN and then through Key Club, I got to know him. That, of course, was in his class in 11th grade and on from there. And then my junior or senior year was the first time that in Texas they had a program called Academic Decathlon that came along. And so he was one of the two sponsors for Academic Decathlon. So between Model UN, Key Club, and then Academic Decathlon, I spent a lot of time with Mr. Balch. He was one of the first history professors history professors. He was a professor. He taught at a junior college, but a history teacher. He's one of the first history teachers that I remember that really did more of a lecture style. So it was preparing me well for college. I mean, in our junior year, he lectured in American history. And I go this long way around the block and going to come back to the front door to say one of the things that made me appreciate history even more. I already had a love of history at that point, but he was very good about telling the stories that connected the dots or connected the threads for history. It wasn't just about, yes, it was about the broad sweeps and here's the three causes of this and the three results of, that kind of thing you were going to regurgitate on a test. But he was also very good about telling sort of a narrative that went along with that weaved it together. And American history is ripe for that, of telling narratives, and he was very good at doing that.
And I think, me personally, that's a really important fact, is that highway, that narrative, the connection of things just helped me engage with it. I may not remember we've come across events where we may not remember the detail about it, but we remember the road on either side of it.
Right. And to me, how does this tie back to the idea of what we do here? Because a lot of times, for better or for worse, probably it's for worse. We could probably do better at this. But a lot of times these days, we don't jump in and spend hours and hours and hours and hours of prep on an episode. In fact, one of the things I really enjoy that we do is we have a topic. Okay, we'll talk a little bit off podcast about maybe the general flow, and then we just jump in so that it's much more organic and real, and it's not prepared and it's not scripted. And by the way, I love a lot of the history podcasts that I listen to that are scripted and are well done. That's another thing. That's just not us. But part of the reason we're able to do that is we have people that know the general flow of history, like you, Chris, and the other members of the team, but also because exactly of that, we know the general flow, which means we have to sometimes do a quick internet search to run down a particular detail if we need it. We do that all the time on the fly, but we're able to converse through the narrative. And like you said, we know the street, but we also know the two side streets that are directly adjacent to it. Related to that, I'll just share a story here because I don't know if I've shared this on podcast, but it relates back to what you were saying there, because this is also how this can even change for you over time. You mentioned as a kid knowing those things. There are two stories for me that tie to this. One of them is my next door neighbor. I found out when I was a kid, I may have told this story on the podcast before, was actually a navigator in World War II in Europe on bombers. He was a bomber navigator. And so one of my first model planes, my parents gave me, the cockpit picture is behind me here, talking about pictures behind me, was a P-51D Mustang. It was one of the first models I put together. So I'm playing with it on the back porch, and Mr. Brown, who lived next door, sort of leans over the cyclone chain link fence and says, do you know anything about that plane? I'm like, yeah. I'd read it's a P-51D, and it's a cool looking plane. It's still my favorite fighter plane. But I didn't understand the significance of the P-51s relative to the air war in Europe and what that meant for bombers. For the first time, they actually had planes that could go with them all the way into Germany, not just meet them on the way. But it was a game changer in the air war in Europe. And so here I am. I'm probably 7 or 8 years old, and he opens up to me a little bit about some of his experiences on bombers during World War II. Fast forward way till after his death. We occasionally had these conversations over the years as I was growing up with him next door, him being retired. But I was talking to his wife after he passed away, and we were talking about him. So one of my favorite things was actually talking to Mr. Brown about his time in World War II flying. And she got this interesting look on her face and looked at me and said, "He talked to you about that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he talked to me about that." She said, "He never talked to anybody about that." And for whatever reason, me being a kid, the connection that existed there, I was a safe place, that wasn't all the other stuff that was there. I got to hear these stories that as far as I know, there may have been people in his family that never heard him talk about those experiences. And so I think think of that as a very special thing. That was, again, another personal connection with history. I have plenty of books over here on my bookshelf about, the air war in Europe as a result of that. The other thing was, as I was adopted as a child, very blessed to be the adoptive parents that I have, was adopted at birth.
This one I think I have heard.
Yeah, I eventually found out about, this has been 5 or 6 years ago now, through 23andMe and genetic testing and stuff like that. end up getting connected to somebody who also was adopted, and she's working eventually, without going into all the details of this, because some of it's not even known by my biological family. So, but ended up finding out who my father is, my biological father, and it filled in some of the gaps. Again, that's not my dad. My dad was Jesse Shelley and will always be, and I'm blessed by that. But the interesting concept here was that I found out that part of the reason I ended up going down the path of being given up for adoption was that he had died while he was in the Navy in an accident off the coast of Vietnam. The Forrestal aircraft carrier fire uh, took his life before I was even born, after I was conceived, but before I was even born. And that's what led to me ultimately being given up for adoption. And so I can remember as a kid, and especially as a high school student, going to Washington D.C., not far from where you live, Chris. Walking the mall, walking the monuments there. The Vietnam Memorial is a powerful thing, right? And a lot of people go there and they're doing the rubbings and the etchings of the names of family members that are related to that. I didn't have that connection. The first fact, I haven't been back to the Vietnam Memorial since this information has come to light for me, but I know that my biological father's name is on that memorial.
Okay.
And so, yep, did I know about Vietnam? Did I know about U.S. military history? All of these other things? Yes. I now, even as an adult, come to find a different connection to it than what I had before. That's the reason for telling that story, is that, I think one of the things that draws you to history, as you've already said, draws me to history, draws a lot of people I know that are interested in history to it, is there's the big sweep of events, but it's how did this touch my family, or how did this influence where I came from? And that's where that's where micro history meets macro history, if that makes any sense.
I think you mentioned a really important idea of micro history, of the different, a person's stories about things that somebody did at some point is history in its own way.
Right. Yeah. The fact that it may never make a book doesn't mean that it's not history, right?
Right.
Or the fact that all the time, and so many died, for example, on December 7th, 1941. So many survived on December 7th, 1941. And those individual micro stories make up the macro story in a way that I think that is very unique or interesting. What else about history, Chris?
I'm trying to think. No, nothing jogs. I mean, I don't. Specific questions. I love talking. I love that. That's part of. I think it's gotten to the point that with friends, my love of stories is almost comical. They rush me through stories regularly, but I feel there's a connection there.
Yeah, and one of the things, again, part of this is for folks to get to know you a little bit better, but also just talk about our process a little bit more, because I think people don't understand how we do what we do here. Is that I'm fascinated when we gather the team together, and it's a little bit different each time, when there's a little bit different team and there's a little bit different dynamic to it there, of how everybody brings their own personal story and observation to this idea of how we approach history, using an alternative as a way to understand the reality. It works both ways, right? I mean, we understand what did by what could have in so many instances, but each person brings a different perspective to that as a result of the process that we go through. And we find these amazing surprises along the way. I was thinking about our recordings just this past weekend, the episodes that we did then. I guess one of them is not even out yet. It'll be the episode that it's not, at the time of recording, it's not out yet. You will have already heard it now if you're a listener by the time you hear this, but it's the one that's going to talk about Roosevelt dying as a as a president-elect, and then we ultimately get to Huey Long becoming the president. I'm no spoiler now, because our listeners will have already heard this, even though it hasn't been released out into the public space yet. But I was amazed that we were going through that. That was not a topic we had planned beforehand. It was very ad hoc and on the fly that day, and I think it worked very well.
It was
What
our
was it?
second topic of the day too. We were already kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and you know, and I think it ended up being a good episode. I'd rank it up there as a better episode. But I had no idea that talking about that was going to lead us eventually to this idea of the U.S. never gets involved in World War II, and what does that mean? You know,
Mhm.
that's there's there's 100 episodes of what you could talk about with respect to that if you really wanted to go down that. That was an unexpected surprise of the topic, and that's one of the reasons I keep coming back and enjoying doing this. Is there's the constant unexpected surprises of, wow, now I've really got to think. I had not even thought about that until Chris said that, or
I,
until one of the Erics said that, or until Robert said that, or whatever the case might be.
I'm going to remind you of what might be one of my favorite forks, which was maybe the second or third episode I was on, where we don't develop nuclear weapons. I'm sure you remember that, and the setup I did for that. I was really proud of that one.
Yep. That one is called, I'm looking here now because I have a database, by golly. And I
No, you
know
don't.
who,
No, you don't. You have a spreadsheet.
uh, yes and no. Accurate, and at the same time also not the same. I think it's called Negated Nuke.
Yes.
So I will make sure that I also put a link to it in the show notes for folks that haven't heard it. That would be back on that would be episode 65. So that was 20 episodes removed from your first appearance. And I can tell now that on that episode, that was just you and me, Chris. On
Was it?
Negated Nuke. Yep. There's a later one later, I think, that involves Brant that also went down a path with nuclear weapons as
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
But Negated Nuke was just you and me.
Okay.
There was no option to bomb Hiroshima, and so there's no bombing of Hiroshima. What do you do with that?
Right. Right.
And you go from there. Well, again, I just thought this would be a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
And the idea of equal time, since Dylan got his chance to sort of get introduced, and you're always saying hi to the good people. Maybe it'd be nice for the good people to know a little bit more about Chris Coppola.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to call Chris a friend. I'm happy to call him a member of our team here, and happy to have him, and all the things that go with that, Chris. So again, if nothing else comes out of a fork in time historically, uh, I know a guy who has family in North Carolina and who lives in the DC area, that even if we don't talk history, we can argue about barbecue.
And as soon as you do get up here to the Vietnam Veterans Wall, you've got a tour guide. You've got somebody to show you around.
I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to that.
And I think we keep talking about a live show. We keep talking about another live stream. I think that's a really fun and interesting experience for us when we do those, to get members, to get the community involved, and to do a more interactive idea.
Yeah. Well, one of the cool things is I'll just mention this, and we'll go ahead and close out. But I mentioned it a lot in the last couple of months because we finally got one set up, the Discord server. And so one of the things I had was, okay, how do we turn this one-way medium? A podcast is a one-way audio medium, right? How do we turn that into something interactive in a way that's, reasonably manageable? Well, okay, we built a website. There's feedback there. We don't get a lot of feedback there. I don't get a lot of emails. But when we set up the Discord server, and when we're active on the Discord server, when I remember to push things out to it, we do have our listeners that show up there and they interact with us. And one of the cool things that happened a couple of weeks ago, we had gone into another hiatus. We're getting back into it. We're getting rolling forward. Then life comes along. I've mentioned this before. My grandson was born a little more than 2 months ago. Alexis's, first child, and we're going down that path and all the things that go with that. And just, life gets in the way of this fun thing that we like to do called a podcast. And just one of our listeners just popped out on the Discord because we hadn't had a lot of activity going on. Everything okay? It was a simple little thing, but what jumped out at me about that, Chris, was this idea of, this is a person, I don't even know their real name. I just know their handle on the Discord server. And they're just like, notice you hadn't put out an episode in a while. Everything okay?
What struck me as interesting is, I think when that user posted that, we'd already made a recording
Yeah.
arrangements. It might have like we normally we try to do Sunday afternoons, and this might have been Saturday midday. We were already going to do one.
Right.
It was just somehow the like his mental clock clicked over to ask about it, and our clocks had already were just a little bit ahead, but it hadn't come out yet.
Yeah. And then what amazed me about that, and this is what I'll say about that. What amazed me about that was, my response was, oh, by the way, we do have one in the book. We got recording scheduled. We ended up doing knocking out a double header that day. But the other thing was that after that, and I mentioned, again, it's just the thing. Life gets in the way here. We're busy with all the stuff that's going on, and with work and with family. Is then that part, well, it'll be a special Christmas, the first one with your grandchild. It was just as simple as that.
Mhm.
Again, this person that's somewhere in the world, I have no idea where this person exists in the world. They may respond now that they've heard this episode and they'll pop in and let me know. But I could look, maybe they're on the Discord server, but this person, I don't know who they are in terms, I couldn't identify them on the street if I passed by them. And I don't know where in the world they are, but they were kind enough to say, hey, we have this common thing that we do. We have this common thing that we do where I listen to you guys yap on about sometimes history and sometimes other crap that has nothing to do with history.
Mhm.
And I like that. I do it regularly. I missed when it's not here. Hope you guys are okay. Okay, great to hear. By the way, have a good holiday. It's as simple as that.
Mhm.
That's, the world. This is what I'll say. The world would be a lot better place if we just did a little more of that. It's as simple as that, because it's really difficult to get mad at somebody that you've had a conversation with. If you've really had a conversation with them versus just an exchange, an anonymous exchange over some social media now with them, which is way too much of what we get. All right, this is Don exiting his soapbox. I'm looking over. I actually do have soapboxes. I actually do have a set of soapboxes, so I could theoretically put my foot up on one if I had them properly configured.
Are they like the cardboard Irish Spring? Are they actual soap? No, these are soapboxes that could support. Okay.
Yeah. I asked for that one Christmas. I said, I actually want some soapboxes.
Okay.
So I have them. All right. Anything before we close out, Chris?
I want to change one of the things you just said.
Okay.
I want to change the fact that we don't recognize that random person. I would love to grow our group more. To get more people involved, to get more perspectives, to get more ideas. I think what we do, I have to say, every single time that we come to an agreement on a recording time, what is the next thing you're going to see in the Slack channel from me?
Is what came today. Topic? Question mark?
Yep. Topic question mark. Because I never would have done the Huey Long episode. I never would have done a lot of these. I never would have come up with that fork. And I think our group and I think us, when we get on recording, it feels almost like a mill, in that somebody comes in and throws the grist in, and we process it in our own way, and it's interesting with what comes out. But I'd love more people to give us more stuff.
I agree with you, and along those lines, again, peeling back the curtain a little bit here, Chris, is I was looking at getting on to record today because we did this on sort of short notice, and there's another planning recording that we're doing there. I was looking through we have a list of topics. We've had a lot of suggestions. We will get around to this. If you suggested one, like, why haven't they done my suggestion? And they're off doing this thing. It's just not that we don't want to. It's just we want to do it. We want to do it justice. That the part of it is just doing it justice. But it's real easy to find ourselves in the same vein. I mean, the running joke with Alexis is because she loves English history is okay. Alexis on an episode, it's probably going to be English history. That's what she likes. But what I love is how you've taken me to places, and other members of the podcast have taken me to places I never would have gone. I didn't even know I wanted to go there. I'll mention the Discord server here as being one of those things. One of the members of our team, Dylan Holzheimer, who's the recent member of the team here. And Dylan's a fun guy. Dylan's just fun to talk to. He's fun to be on air with, but he's fun to talk to. A bright guy. He's okay, even for a lawyer. Dylan actually on the Discord server commented on the recent episode that we did. He has Patreon access, so he's listened to an episode that most of our listeners have not heard because he can hear it early. And so he was commenting on that, and then since he wasn't on the episode, now he's giving his thoughts on probably what he would have said on the episode, including who he would have suggested potentially could have been the Republican nominee in 1936 in the alternate path that we're taking here, and why. So he mentions Kermit Roosevelt, who is TR's second oldest son, I think. And then he makes this reference to the river of doubt thing. Chris, I think I know a lot about history.
Yeah.
Somehow in my exploration of history, I had never heard about Roosevelt in the Amazon.
Ooh, I had heard about that, but not really. I'm reminded of the one we did on the French Roman Empire, maybe just a couple of months ago.
Yeah,
maybe a month.
And again, I think of myself as being fairly well read and fairly knowledgeable. Just like, unless this is one of those things because it's post presidency. It's not in the mainstream of regular history. It's more of a biography thing. I don't think I've ever read with this proves I've never read a good biography of Roosevelt, or else I would know about that if I'd read it all the way through. But it's like he makes this reference to the River of Doubt thing. I'm like, okay, I know who Kermit Roosevelt is, but the River of Doubt thing I don't. So I Google, and it's like, wow, there's this whole thing I did not even know about. So I hunt down a PBS documentary that I'm able to watch, and so now I have this. There's this thing I didn't even know I cared about that suddenly now I care about. And hopefully for our listeners, to your point, Chris, occasionally we spark that, and to your point that you were just making, spark that back with us, because it's easy for us to get caught in areas of history, categories of history, time frames of history, and we'll keep doing that, but that loses some of the freshness of what's there, which is why bringing new people in to the mix is also part of what's fun there, which is, the last time I'll pitch this, I pitch it all the time. I'll continue to pitch this. Our team is not finished. If you want to come be part of what we do here, let us know. Pop on the website, A Fork in Time. Let us know you'd like to get involved. We'd love to have you. Now, we're not just going to let anybody, on an episode. We're pretty close. They let me on episodes. We let Chris on episodes. We will let almost anybody on an episode. If you're cognizant and you don't spout craziness, and even if you spout craziness, as long as you're fun while you do it.
Yeah, that's still the some of our stuff is
cool. Chris, I've enjoyed this. Again, I've gotten to know you, but I thought it'd be a good idea to let listeners know a little bit more, and again, give you equal time back with Dylan. Probably plan to do this with other members of the team, just because we did not do it. So it's first of all, it's a nice way to get an episode done that's not an episode, so that's easy. Yeah. But also, it's good to let everybody know a little bit more about who these people are that are talking at them than they would otherwise. All right, I'm going to close out now. Suggest that our listeners visit the website. You can find out everything you want to know there, including how to support us, how to give feedback to us, how to launch the Discord server, and all the other good stuff. You'll see bios of the team there. Chris's bio is there as well as others. And Chris, again, the alternate history I don't want to imagine is where I didn't meet Chris Coppola. That's the alternate history that I don't want to meet. So we're going to avoid that. But we're still going to suggest to our listeners, if you happen upon a fork in time, a good suggestion might be to do what?
Take it.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime, or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.